Yeah, we're live. It is 7:08, a few minutes late. Had to get a lot of stuff going before I could start. Gage is in the house. What's up? So today we're going to talk about Ford versus Chevy, and that's the thumbnail that I put up. Ford small block and a Chevy small block. In fact, not just any small blocks. Although we could have doctored anything up that was a Ford or Chevy, but what the photo of the photo that I posted, the two engines are actually pretty cool. One was a Boss 302, circa 1970, I think. I can't remember if this was a 69 or 70 that had the bigger valves, and a DZ302. Now, the DZ302, the replica at least of both of these that we built, was 69. So we ran both of these way back when to kind of compare them in our shootout for all of the kind of factory small blocks. And this brings up a good point, not particularly about those two, because we could spend the whole night talking about a comparison between those two, because we know that they did similar things. I mean, if you look at a comparison between a Boss Mustang, a 302 Mustang, and a DZ302 Chevrolet, you're going to see more similarities than you do differences, in wheelbase and brakes and suspension and handling and acceleration. All those things are actually very, very comparable, which is not surprising. And through the years, we see that because they're trying to build, competitive marketplace cars. So it's not unusual that, given the same constraints for both of them, emissions and fuel mileage and all the warranty issues and everything that goes along with building a production vehicle. What are you doing, Milo? They would come across doing the same things. I mean, Ford is making their version of it, Chevy's making their version of it, and Pontiac and Dodge and so on. But obviously, with the Ford and the Chevy, they went about it different ways. Especially not so much if we compare a conventional small block Chevy to a Windsor 289, 260, 302, and 351. Those would actually be much more comparable to a small block Chevy. The Boss, because it was a Cleveland-headed deal, and then subsequent other Cleveland versions like the Boss 351, which were dedicated Clevelands, the Boss 302 was more of a Windsor-Cleveland hybrid. And because it had way better cylinder heads than anything Chevrolet was offering at the time, it kind of had an advantage in terms of power potential. The thing is, in Ford's infinite wisdom for that particular combination, we see that they teamed that with lots and lots of head flow with a fairly mild camshaft, especially mild in relation to what Chevrolet was using in theirs in the DZ302. The camshaft that they had in that was probably 20 degrees bigger, because they had not anywhere near the cylinder head flow that the Boss did. So they went about it differently. The Chevrolet had a little bit more compression than the Ford did. They both had dual plane intake manifolds and good carburetors, and they both were offering them with 4-speed trans and gearing and all that stuff. But they went about their process differently. And we see that a little bit through the years as we go up and see. But the interesting thing is that year after year, if you read Road and Track or any of the other magazines, you see where they're directly comparing at least production pieces. Now, it's kind of hard. It's interesting when you go back and look through all that stuff, how different, the real performance-oriented magazines did. The dedicated ones, they either put a little bit more effort into the test vehicle that they wanted. They were given a different test vehicle so that it showed better. It's not unusual for the OEMs to have tweaked some of these to make them a little bit better. Shelby was kind of famous for that. Or that these guys were maybe better at getting the thing launched. Maybe they're using real drag race drivers as opposed to some of the other magazines that were, let's face it, they weren't driving to the limit of the car. They were driving to the limit of that particular driver, which is why for years and years and years, I kept suggesting to these guys, I was like, you guys need to get a pro driver. And now they have Randy Popes. So you guys need to get a pro driver that knows how to drive the car, not just your limit, because we don't care about your limit. I mean, some guys do, even though, and some of those guys were decent drivers, but they're not Randy Popes. They're not Boris Said. They're not any of those guys. So for years, I was telling them that, and I'm glad that they finally did it. But as we go through the years of the various Ford, Chevy, and we could talk about other makes too, but for tonight, we're going to talk about the Ford and Chevy. We see that, like, when we go through the 5-liter Mustang, the carbureted stuff and the fuel injected stuff, the the LB9 stuff and the HO, the L69 versions, and the L98, and then the HO Mustang, we see that the accelerations and braking and handling and all that stuff we're all pretty comparable. A lot of times, like with the L98, with the 350 version of that tune port motor, and let's face it, a 5-liter Mustang, whenever we talk about tune port Chevrolet motors, we're talking about something that's super torquey, and everybody recognizes that intake manifold. Some people think that, oh, it's just restrictive. It's not restrictive. It's just that it had really, really long runners, and it wanted to make peak power at a fairly low RPM. It's not because it couldn't breathe anymore. It's just that the reflected wave wants to produce power at that RPM range. But Ford had exactly that too. Theirs was just shaped differently. It didn't wrap around, and in my opinion, the tune port deal is one of the better, if not the best looking induction system that they ever offered on Chevrolet. I thought it was really, really cool looking. Not terribly efficient for RPM and making lots and lots of power, but it sure made a lot of torque. And as we talked about many times, would have been an excellent motor for truck applications where they were, and especially if they, even went milder on the camshaft, they could probably get the thing, enhanced even more, or on a truck application, maybe make the runners even longer. But the Ford version of that was the 5-liter HO manifold. Certainly in the fuel injected versions when they started in '86, and then the subsequent years up to '93, and then even the SN95 stuff when they went into it, they're still making the 5-liter. If you look at all of those manifolds, they're all, and then you measure the runner length, even though Ford went in and back around, then back and up and down, and then into the lower manifold. And if you measure the runner lengths, they're very comparable. And not surprisingly, the engineers were kind of doing the same things on both sides of the aisle there. And so the Ford motor also wanted to make power at a very low engine speed. It wasn't a high RPM thing, and I remember back in the day, we were doing a lot of stuff with the guys from Extrude-Home. We were Extrude-Home porting it. And early on, our guys were like, yeah, we could port this thing and then it'll rev out. I'm like, no, it's not going to rev out. It'll flow more, but it's not going to rev out. It's still, the manifold is still going to want to do that. Only when you put those Hartman or Cartec or any of those box manifolds, the Downs one, if you put any of those short runner manifolds on there, then you go, oh yeah, now it wants to make power at a different engine speed. Sure, we lost a lot of the stuff that made these motors kind of great. But then as we go up, then we get into the modular stuff and eventually the Coyote stuff. But again, the Ford and Chevy stuff, if you look at a Coyote Mustang and an LT or previous to that, an LS3 based Camaro, you're going to see very comparable acceleration times and braking and handling and all that stuff. And the Ford and Chevy guys can yell back and forth all that they want. But it's interesting that you look at the different way that they did it back in '69 and '70. They allowed Chevrolet in SCCA allowed them to then de-stroke the bigger motors and not make a dedicated motor. So they didn't have to make the 302 anymore. They could step up to the LT1, which arguably is a better motor. It made, in the test that I did, it made just a ton more torque down low. So it'd be, and it was a smaller camshaft. It'd be a better driver and stuff. And but when they were making the Boss motor with the better heads and Chevrolet was doing it with camshaft, they obviously were taking a different approach. And if you look at the latest stuff, a Coyote in 5-liter form is definitely a different way to do it than having a 6-liter or a 6.2 version of an LS3 or an LT motor. Definitely different than, definitely a different approach. But again, getting very good results with both of those applications. So it shows that there's more than one way to do it. So the question for tonight, and we'll do the poll. So how are we going to phrase this? So we're going to talk about small block Chevys, not the later modular stuff or anything. It is the small block Ford better than the, you guessed it, small block Chevy. You guys might be able to hear a fan I have going on because it's kind of fairly warm in here. I think it's 90 outside. So the small block Ford better than the small block Chevy. Maya, what are you doing? Lay down, sweetie. Come here. Come here. Come here and say hello. What are you doing? I know it's hot in here, huh? It's hot in here. Do you want to go downstairs where it's nice and cool? No? Okay. So is the small block Ford better than the small block Chevy? I think, these absolute things are, I have to keep turning toward the fan. Hopefully I'm not getting too much fan wash on the mic here. Oh, they're doing okay. So, the question then becomes, if we, when Ford was doing their way and Chevy was doing their way, is that what made some people gravitate more toward the Ford and more toward the Chevy? Did we get a shift from, did having the Boss motor, and the Boss heads that flowed so well, and I'm sure it was, the Chevy guys were very envious. They're like, man, if we only had our camshaft and our compression with that kind of head flow, what a marvelous combination it would be. But I don't know how much, especially back then, because I think we had even more brand loyalty back then. I think that the Ford versus Chevy rivalry was a real thing back then, and I think that guys now maybe are looking more of a good deal, and I don't know, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe guys are still adamant that one is certainly better than the other. But you know me, I don't really look at it that way. I look at all of them and see how they do it and try to appreciate that, and then find out if we can obviously make it better. We can make all those better. The Ford needs more camshaft in terms of the Boss, and then the Chevy needs more cylinder head. And quite honestly, both of them need more cylinder head and more camshaft. And then obviously they all definitely need boost. I had the other thing that I want to talk about today is I had a conversation with the Barra gentleman, because I've been putting that off, and not as soon as I had the motor and the valves were broken stuff, I'm like, I just can't. I just had to push it to the side and not. I have too many other things that I have to get done, because if I don't get stories done or videos done, obviously I don't get paid, because that's the only thing that I do for a living. So if I have to spend a week or whatever, 2 weeks getting something done, that's me not doing anything. So I push that stuff aside and get stuff done that I know I can get done. But I do want to maybe revisit that and see if we can't get I think really the only thing holding back running a Barra, and this is the naturally aspirated version, the really low buck kind of, if there is such a thing, the really low buck base starting point. Because most people that you see, if you look at the videos on YouTube, you can see that most of these guys, and rightfully so, if you're going to do a turbo version, you start out with one of the production turbo versions, better rods and that kind of stuff. But I want to see, as we have seen with the LS stuff, and lots of other, the big blocks and small blocks and Fords and stuff, we can add boost to obviously anything. And so those motors, the NA motors, the early ones, especially with weak rods and stuff, they have a reputation of having weak rods. And so these, you don't want to use these because these are not nearly as good. But how good are they? Are they not good by 5%, 10%? Are we going to have to really make a lot of power? Like the same argument happens, I think, and I don't know if this is the same extent, because obviously I'm not a Barra expert and I've never tested one. So I don't have any data to base this on, but my speculation is, or my question is, are we seeing the same thing that we see in a Gen 4 versus a Gen 3? I mean, we made lots and lots of runs way over 1,000 horsepower on Gen 3 stuff. Yet everybody will tell you, oh, you can't use Gen 3. You got to upgrade to Gen 4 stuff. I'm like, no, you don't have to. If you want to make a 600 or 700 or 800 horsepower motor, you can run Gen 3 stuff. And we did. And we didn't just do it once for some one beauty run and cross our fingers. I mean, I do that when we're turning the boost up. But after you do 20 or 30 or 50 of those, you're like, dude, just run it. I don't know. I don't even care anymore. Let's just do it. Let's make it happen. And it lasted a really, really long time. And I'm not the only one that has done that. I'm not even the first guy that did that. I was just doing things that drag racers were already out there doing. And they were doing it early enough that they only had Gen 3 stuff. And then the Gen 4 stuff is definitely better. There's no doubt about that. And if you wanted to build an all-out thing, just like with the LS, I think you probably would replace the rods and the pistons anyway. You'd put Forged rods in it. You'd put Forged pistons in it. The cranks we normally don't hurt. I think that block is fairly strong, and I'm sure somebody's going to bring up, have you seen the billet block? Yes, I've seen the billet block. 3,000 horsepower is beyond the scope of the stuff that I do. It's cool that a guy's doing that, like the billet block that Mahovitz has over there for the modular stuff. That's very, very cool. But again, not your normal kind of thing. So that's very cool. But I'm more interested in finding out what the basic one did, because I'm sure that they made a lot more of the naturally aspirated versions than they made the specialty turbo versions. If our production numbers of LS9s and LSAs, if in comparison to LS3 or L99 or LM7 for that matter, I'm sure that there's a lot more 4.8 and 5.3 base motors, just like there's a lot more NA base Barra motors than there are the turbo versions. So with the overabundance of those, and because what's going to happen, and this has happened with all of these motors, I know, because I remember when I was doing the B16 Honda stuff, when I was racing the Del Sol in US Touring Car, and when I was writing the book on my first book on Honda performance on B and D series stuff, that I remember going and buying these. What's the matter? Hey, what are you doing? Leave him alone. I remember going and buying these motors for a few $100s, these JDM motors. I'm like, this can't last forever. This is way too good of a deal, because you can't buy some of the parts on there for what we were buying, the complete running, ready to go motor. I mean, they said, yeah, we pre-started everyone and check it and verify it. I'm thinking, okay, cool. They put it on at least a run stand or something. No, they just set it on the bench and jumper it and start it and do compression tests or whatever. It was kind of cool, but obviously definitely the low buck way to go. But I remember looking at that and buying those and thinking, this can't last forever, and it hasn't. The prices of those have gone up, and we will see that happen to LS stuff as well. The pricing, this overabundance of LS stuff won't go on forever. They're so popular that we'll just run out of them, and then the prices will start going up. And so the same thing with the Barra stuff is the turbo stuff, I'm sure, is already more expensive. And as that supply becomes used up, people will start looking for the NA stuff. So I want to run some of the NA stuff and see if that's a viable deal. Obviously not as an all-out build. It's not going to match what I think a Gen 3 is not going to match what a Gen 4 would do. And the NA version is not going to match what a turbo version, if you're all in on both of them. But it might be enough for a lot of guys. If you just want to add 10 or 15 pounds of boost to it and put ring gap in it, and with the stuff that we do, head studs and that kind of stuff, is it a viable deal? And I think it is, based on all the other stuff that we've done, not knowing anything particularly about that motor, but about every other motor that we've applied boost to. You can do that stuff with relative safety. So it'll be interesting test, and I hope that we get to run it. The thing that I'm missing is a harness to be able to run it. We can run it with either a Holley if we don't run variable cam, or the MS3 Pro would be better because we can run variable cam with that. I'm assuming, and we had this discussion today, that the MS3 Pro would allow us to run variable cam on both the intake and the exhaust. And it would be an interesting comparison with that and the Atlas, the later 2006 Atlas, to see how those two compare. Obviously, I would think that the torque would lean toward the bigger motor, torque production, but it would be an interesting comparison. We could run boost on both of them, obviously, and we've run boost a little bit, and Calvin's done a bunch, and we're going to do more, because I have one now that's been the head's been redone on it and stuff, so we can run, and it would be a good comparison between the Barra and the Atlas, because the Atlas is the Ameribarra. So that's also something that we can do, and it will be interesting. I think guys would like seeing comparisons of that, and I think that they would like ultimately seeing comparisons of going all the way up and kind of seeing what happens, and that's something that could also be done. So let's see what you guys got going on. Get some fan action here. Don't fall over. Don't fall over. There we go. Yeah, now we're blowing. Put that there. Just fixing all of my paper here. Let's see, who still casts new small block Ford blocks that don't cost crazy amounts of money? Is Ford still doing that? I don't think that they are they? I'm rewinding the lightning coil. Nice. By hand? James, I know which one I'd rather replace a water pump on or do a cam swap on. It's not it's not a four-letter word. It's true. The water pump on a Ford is definitely different than it is on a Chevrolet. And then the front cover. The thing that I like the water pump on the Ford, because I've done lots and lots of swaps on 5-liter Fords, and we're pretty proficient at it. But the thing that I don't like about either one of those small blocks is having to drop the pan to pull the front cover. Like I really like the way that they did the LS. It just makes the cam swaps a lot easier. No one cares about Porsche. Some people do. I think Dan does. Show me what kind of power you can make with the 305. I've raced against 305s in IROX and that model Camaro in World Challenge, and they they can make a lot of power. Liv, what's up? How's that overhead Pontiac doing? You tested the AFR Enforcer series for small block and some small block Ford. No, but I put I sent a message into them about doing the first one that I want to do actually is a small block Ford. So I want to test that head and see how it does. Fixing forklifts, that's super fun. 4-bolt cross bolted or better than regular 4-bolt. Let's see here. Man, I wish I would, when I hit this, I wish I wouldn't just jump down arbitrarily. What are your thoughts on high RPM screamers? Does the Ford 5-liter 302 hold an edge to 305s? Well, I think that guys have argued different things on those. A 305 is limited in its head offerings. It's the availability of cylinder heads for that because it has a small bore. So ultimately, that would kind of limit RPM potential possibly. Although I don't know where, because a ported set of those small bore trick flow heads actually can flow pretty well. And I don't think that the bore and stroke in the reasonable RPM range where you would be running that 305, I don't think that holds it back. So you can make a lot of power with those. The 5-liter would be good. You know, everyone says, oh, it's got a 4-inch bore. It's gonna want to rev. The one thing that's nice about the 5-liter is it has like 50 sets of cylinder heads for you to choose from. So you can make you can run lots and lots of head flow to that, and that helps with RPM potential. The argument against that is 305s don't have a reputation of the blocks breaking. And Ford 302s do. And this because it doesn't come from a guy who's a Chevy guy. In fact, I'm not a Chevy or a Ford or a Barra or a rotary. I'm just an engine guy. And I know what I try to learn what the limitations and positive attributes of all of these are. And I have a Mustang and a 5-liter Mustang, and I'm an original owner and I like them. But I do know that they're not perfect, and I don't try to fight somebody if they tell me something bad about a Mustang. But they do have a reputation of that, and the 305 does not have that reputation. In fact, none of the small blocks have that reputation. Richard, do you care to do a stroker 351 with some AFR versus the Godzilla motor to see how good the new heads are? I don't know how that's a direct shootout. And I don't have a Godzilla anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. The 7.3 liter doesn't qualify as a small block, in my opinion. Mopar and AMC are better than both. That's hard to argue that. The one that I would be curious about, I don't think any of the Mopar small blocks are as good as or make as much power as the Boss 351. The AMCs might. We had a little conversation about that last night, especially the 400-inch stuff, if it still qualifies as a small block. Even rewound the transformer by hand. Nice. Tiger, what's up? Which aftermarket small block Chevy do you prefer, World or Dart? I don't remember if I don't think I've run a World Products small block. I've run the World Products big blocks, and I really like them. They work very well. I have run Dart SHP small blocks, and those have all worked really well. I've never had a problem with either one of those, but I haven't run the World small block. Liv, let me know if somebody's interested in any Pontiac stuff. I've got some stuff that a friend of mine is trying to get rid of. They have a 4-speed, an M20 with a shifter and pedals and all that stuff. Somebody's looking. They were going to put it in a 69 GTO. Also, front bumper assembly. It's not the Enduro bumper. It's the other one for a 69 GTO. Some heads and heads and block and various things. A 346 pack or the 68 340 4-speed Duster motor with a big cam in it is good. A 383 wavy is not, in my opinion, a small block. An Olds 40 again, a 403 is that a small block? Because the 318 Polia, because the Pontiac guys will argue that all of their blocks are not small blocks or big block. That's crazy Chevrolet stuff. Oldsmobile, the same thing. Pontiac, Olds, and Buick. So again, I don't know where people draw that line. Lots of people will draw the line where their thing wins, and that's right after that. Everything can't be run. What's the 7.3 liter? 427 or something? Is that what size it is? .45. Pontiacs are just V8s. Yep, not the way that I think about it. There's big block and small block Pontiacs. The 400 Chevy is a small block, but the thing is, for comparing stock stuff, the 400 small block just never made any power. 200 people and 17 likes. Come on, guys, get those likes up. How is our poll doing? Is a small block Ford better than the small block Chevy? 61% saying no. Where's all of our Ford people? 444. Yeah, that's what I came out with. Pontiac guys, yeah. Yep, I've met lots and lots of them. God bless them, though. Chevy TunePort 350, the L98. That was a good motor. Like I said, it's probably the best truck motor that they never put in a truck. Is bore spacing the deciding factor between small and big blocks? It is on the Chevy side. They're different blocks. So one of them is a small block and one of them is a big block. And then for me, it's just the carryover and kind of displacement. But then we get into the gray area. A 396 is a big block, but they also made a 400 small block. A 427 big block is definitely a big block, and a 454 is definitely a big block. That's why a 455 Pontiac because it's like a 454 and a 455 Olds and a 455 Buick. All those are big blocks, but they're not, and they are. Junkyard Guru, can you think of a modern steel wheel that would work and look good on a classic Mustang? Can you put rally wheels on it from a Chevy? Racer D, Olds 455 and a 403 makes a 511. Does all of that fit? Can you make that? I mean, you can make anything fit, I get. My question for you, Racer, though, is I want to do an Iron Duke, and I want to go get one from the wrecking yard. Should I get a carbureted one, or should I get a fuel-injected one? And if I get a fuel-injected one, do you know what the crank trigger and the cam trigger are on the Iron Duke? You forgot a couple of the big blocks. Richard, we're building a 1401 small block Ford 363 for a friend's drag car. Which heads, in your opinion, make the best power? We're leaning toward AFRs. That's a good choice, I think. I don't think, does TrickFlow make, I don't think they make an 11R head, right, for a small, oh, it's a small block Ford. I don't think they make a bigger 11R head though, right? I think that they're 205s and 190s and 170s or something. Yeah, Dan, the 366 is the one that I was thinking of in the truck stuff. Let's see. I'm just trying to explain the 221 small block Ford. That's definitely other guys' small block stuff. Even more than the 260 is. In my opinion, the Godzilla is more like the 400M engine family, which in my opinion is not a, see, this is where I draw the other line. Like a 351, obviously a 351 Windsor and a 351 Cleveland are small blocks. But to me, a 400M is not a small block, and neither is the 351 version of that 400M. Even though the other 351 Fords are small blocks, to me, the 400M is a Midland or medium, or is beyond, it's in the void between big block and small block. We wouldn't be considering those. I think most people don't consider them for performance builds, but I look at them, as I've said many times, despite the fact that they have giant connecting rods and giant push rod lengths because of the deck height. But I look at it as a stroker Cleveland. It would be nice if it had a shorter deck height, but yeah, Dan, I don't think the W motors are, I mean, I guess technically I think GM kind of saw them as big blocks, but definitely different than the other ones. Only the 88 Dukes had direct ignition. Best way to start is with a 3-liter Marine engine, real strong crankshaft. The car cranks are very weak. I want to put a 2.5 in it. I want to put the one that's readily available in the wrecking yard. I don't care about the strength of the motor. It's not going to limit what we're doing. I just want to get one running. What I need to know is what is the trigger wheel, so that I know that I have a fuel injection that will work with it. And if not, I'll do a carbureted one and just run a carbureted distributor, and we'll turn it manually. And then I'll do it as a draw through and just put a carburetor in front of it, which would also be very, very cool. The fuel injected one would be better because then I could run an intercooler and stuff. But that's kind of what I want to do, and I just want to run it. I'm not going to build it or do anything. I'm going to be souping up a 6.2 Super Duty motor. Trick flow has 225 intake. Okay, those are good. The little LT1, I'm going to build one of those. Yes, it's a Ford Lima testing for comparison to the Iron Duke and Chrysler 2.2 stuff. There wouldn't be a comparison. The Iron Duke is not going to compete with the 2.2 Dodge, not the turbo motor. It would have to be built a lot to do that. The Ford, the 2.3 turbo SVO kind of deal, or turbo T-Bird, would be an interesting thing, because I think that would kind of be comparable. 260 Boss for Bonneville. Cool. Do you happen to know if a modular Ford engine would benefit from Honda rod swap? Sounds dumb, but I've always wanted to squeeze a 2E for maximum NA horsepower someday. And all of it will benefit. I mean, what is the rod width on the modular compared to a small block Ford? I don't even remember. .225 slant 6. Shaft rockers, Mopar small block is the best of the three easily. I don't know that just the shaft rockers, which is a good quality, if that makes them the best. We were talking about which one makes more power, and the Dodge, much like the Chevrolet, the 318, 340, 360, even in Magnum form, the head flow just is not anywhere near what a Cleveland head is. Richard, do you have any arguments for not sending a running 351M to the junkyard or selling it? I already have a healthy 302, a 351. They work, and the 351M will make more torque than any of those that you listed there, possibly maybe than the 351 Windsor. But the 351M in 2V Cleveland head probably is better than any of the factory Windsor heads if you're doing like stock for stock. Z11 mystery motor. So Racer, do you know what the crank trigger is and what the cam sensor wheel is? There's one guy I believe squeezed 600 crank out of an NA 2-valve 4.6 liter. I think you can get heads that flow enough to support that. There's a couple doing 500 wheel, almost 500 wheel. Yeah, so that would be close to 600 flywheel. The Ford 429 and 460s are really good motors, and I like the fact that you can make them much bigger, as you mentioned, Aaron, that you can make them much bigger than you can a comparable big block Chevy. Because if you take a factory big block, like a 454 or the Gen 6, Gen 5, Gen 4, doesn't matter, you have a limitation in how big you can make that. But with you can go to a 557 on a stock 460 block, which is kind of cool. And normally we go to a 496 or 500 on the big block Chevys. Tricolo 462 valves in ported form will support 600. I have an 87 Fox GT. From a cost and simplicity standpoint, would you invest in the sound exiting the 5-liter? What is your advice? I don't know what you're asking. Are you asking what kind of exhaust you should put on there? Is $750 a fair price for an LS or 5.2 Magnum already pulled and good? If you know that it's good, that's a reasonable price, and it's already pulled, because a lot of times we'll pay if I have somebody do that, we'll pay them $100.50, so $100 or $100.50 depending on how desperate they are. Fat Cat, a 400 small block Chevy crank will fit in a 350. That's how we make 383s, and that's how they did it back in the day. That was true until the 502 big block Chevy came to be. Yeah, except that they never used the 502. That's an aftermarket block. They never used that in any production car. Big Belly, Richard, I may have missed your answer. Do you ever find AMC 401s in your Junkyards? I don't, but I haven't honestly looked specifically for a 401 in all the applications that they may have come in. Can you do a dyno clip one day testing out the Schoenfeld 95 dBA mufflers? That's oddly specific. Need to boost a flathead Ford. Probably not that. Yeah, the PSI engines. They qualify as factory. The 8.1 seemed to work very well. The 8.1 Chevys, the Gen 7 big blocks. 94 to 96 Mustang GT46 is the best. So the non-PI motor is the best one. This year AFR is coming out with a 5.3 head. They already have a 205 head, and I think that Tony Mammo, before he was gone from there, convinced them to do that. And I've told them for years now that that's the one that they need to do. Because like we've talked about, that they made a bajillion 4.8 and 5.3 motors, small bore things, and they made a handful of other ones. Did the International have a 549 V8 gas in some of the 60s trucks? I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the. Oh, so we have to turn the 400 crank down. Oh, because the journals are, the mains are different, right? Wyatt, what I would do is, if it had, I'm hoping that it, his comment was, do you have any suggestions for how to approach reviving a never run crate engine iron-headed 408 Windsor that's been sitting in a non-climate controlled Florida garage for 7 years? Does it snow there? Does it get really cold? The thing that I would look at, I'm hoping that it had plugs in it. If it didn't have plugs in it, you might be best to take the heads off. If it had plugs in it, I would look in there and see that there's no visible rust. Then I would spray WD-40 or some kind of penetrant in there, and then I would spin it. I would spin it by hand slowly to make sure that it rotates over. And then you could have somebody look in there while you're spinning it and see if, as the piston's coming up, if it's dragging a bunch of rust up with it around the edges. If it's not and it seems to spin freely, then I would, if the distributor's in it, I would take the distributor out and hook up a pressure gauge on the oil. I would put oil in it and a filter on it, plug all the oil holes, obviously, spin it with a drill, make sure it has oil pressure, make sure, take the valve covers off, Make sure that oil is getting to all of the rocker arms. Once you have oil cleanly to all of the rocker arms, then I would say it's probably ready to start. If you run into resistance or it stops when you're trying to spin it, obviously you're going to take it apart. If when you're spinning it over, you see, oh, it just brought up piles of rust, you're going to have to take the heads off and maybe do a quickie hone on it or something. But all of that stuff will tell you, I wouldn't just try to start it and hope for the best. Richard, would you go with the GM 427 crate motor or go to an LS platform? Car is a 70 Nova trying to decide. That's a personal thing. If you have a decision that you're trying to make, just look at the things that you're most important to you. Is a power goal my main thing? Can I get that either way? Then after that, what is the look that I want? Do I want to lift the hood? Do I want people to be more impressed because it has an LS? Do I want them to be more impressed because it still has a small block and it's not an LS? Like which guy are you? And then, pick accordingly. I think it would be interesting to see a factory high compression 69 Buick 350 with a 675 Carter AFB and a Comp 468 cam. Is that your oddly specific combination? .327 crank and a 400 block. That's the 372 or something, right? No, the 372 was the 350 crank and a 400 block. Russell, would a turbo 4.8 to 5.3 be more fuel efficient than a turbo 6-liter and a heavy towing application? I don't know. There's no way anybody could give you an answer on that because they don't know where you are in terms of fuel efficiency while you're towing, like where you're at for the whole thing. You'd have to data log all that and see. That'd be the only way to tell. If you're cruising on flat level ground, the smaller motor is going to give you better fuel mileage. But if you're having to use more of the boosted position where you're going to be less fuel efficient, maybe the 6-liter, maybe there's an argument to be said that I'm getting into less boost with that and less fuel enrichment to go the same speed. There's no way to know that unless we data logged it. And the dyno, unfortunately, would not tell me cruise applications for that. Oh, the 357. Yeah, that's right. Man, on a Honda 50 lights are going to be. The Honda 50 lights are going to work awesome. Nice. Thane, off topic, but is the other guy's 292 Chevy going to make it back on the dyno? Yeah, it will get put back together and run again on the dyno, and probably run again with boost, but not a ton. Rick, I have an 87 Fox. I have a sound original 5-liter. Should I invest in the existing 302? I'm open to an LS or Coyote swap. I'm wanting a streetable 650. The Coyote swap, in my opinion, would be the most expensive. You could get 650 out of a 5-liter with heads and cam and head studs and stuff with a turbo. An LS is going to start off making a lot more power than the 5-liter does. And with the LS, all you'd have to do is put a cam in it and then boost, and 650 would be very, very easy. You don't have to buy heads for it. I think an LS ultimately would be less expensive, but then you'd have to factor in the swap and the transmission. Kelly, just wanted to hear your opinion on catalytic converters and mufflers that restrict exhaust. I've heard you lose low-end torque with no restriction. That's not accurate. With straight exhaust, that's false. You don't want back pressure in your exhaust. Never, ever. Joe, if you have an LQ9 block, those are definitely worth building. That's, I mean, we used an LQ4, I think. No, an LY6 in the Gen 4, and then an LQ4 on the Gen 3. And an LQ9 is a good block, and you can make 1,000,000 horsepower with it. Big Bang Ford GAA. I don't know about that. I do. The guys with the Barra want me to do a big bang on that on the NA version. I've seen the LS headed 300 Fords, and I've seen the Boss headed 300 also. Kind of cool. I mean, obviously that combination definitely needs more cylinder head, and that's one way to go about it. Hot Rod Magazine picked the Boss 351 as the best small block of the muscle car era. Case closed. That's an interesting statement, but if you go back and look at that, if you look at that test and look whose name is on the on who wrote that story, I did that test. What size turbo for a Ford 306 making peak at 4,000 RPM? The peak power RPM. How much power do you want to make? And is anything done to the Ford? Is it all stock? But a 3076 is going to be fine for that. A GT 3076. Should track down a V4 from Europe for the Fox body. Who is better, a big block Chevy or a small block Ford? It seems kind of one-sided. The Iron Duke has a 6 or 7 tooth crank trigger wheel. It seems odd. No, Oliver, I wasn't saying the GA was a Barra. I know what that is. I'm just saying that in addition to that, which obviously I've never come across one of those motors ever, but the Barra is obviously much more readily available because I have 2 of them. Is the L92 in my Yukon worth modding? Yes, that's a good motor. I have lots of L92 videos up. Cameron, you want to put a Ford or a Chevy in your boat? Neither one of those are going to be a bad choice. You have enough cylinder head, so the camshaft that you put in is probably going to be a function on the boats. Normally, they're a function of what kind of exhaust system you have, whether you have a wet exhaust or not, because you have to worry about reversion on them. And sometimes that becomes the limiting factor, not the exhaust flow itself, although that obviously hurts power in the testing that we've done. Sometimes a lot, especially on big block applications, but it limits how much camshaft that you can put in it. So you can't make a lot of power, even if you have really good heads, if you're limiting by the wet exhaust. Is a small block Ford better than small block Ford better than a small block Chevy? 59% are saying no, 41% are saying yes. So the Ford guys are coming back. You can buy LT5s. If you look, I've seen people who hoard them. The West Tech guys have one of those I really want to run. Have you used Edelbrock heads or trick flow heads for the Dodge Magnum? I haven't run them on the Magnum. I've run the Edelbrock aluminum heads on a 360 LA motor, and honestly, they didn't really do very much. And I've talked to Dulcich about that many times, and he said the same thing. They're just not that much better than a stock head. But in ported form, they work really well. A 5.3 liter LS and a jet ski would be good. How much power is a clutch connection versus a torque converter? I think you lose more through the automatic and the torque converter than you do through a direct clutch, as long as the clutch isn't slipping, but you don't have torque multiplication. Cash, there's no wrong answer there on your 383. Should you pro charge it or spray it? There, we've run pro chargers with nitrous on it, you know, for cooling. What is the best head intake combo for a 5-liter on a budget? The best budget one is the stuff from the Wrecking Yard, is the Explorer stuff. So get the GT40 heads and that Explorer / GT40 Cobra style induction system. It's fairly cheap at the Wrecking Yard and it works pretty well. The 427 Cammer was never a production motor. At least the other guys were using production motors, right? What's Bill doing? Bill just unsubscribed. Does anybody know why? All I saw was the unsubscribe thing. I didn't see. Well, let's see. Oh, hey, I've asked you twice. So what? Let's see what he asked. Let's go back and find out what Bill's question was. Wow. You know I can't read every one, right? But, you know, don't worry about that. 89 to 95 Corvette LT5 4-cam 32 valve super rare. Are they super rare? I guess Bill's gone, so we don't have to answer him. But we've talked about the LT5 many times on the chat. As a matter of fact, I did mention that Westech has one of those, so I don't know where he went off on. Let's see. Bill got mad that you said you're pulling the 6.2 out of the Nova. Wow. It's a new thing people are doing. They unsubscribe. People get to do what they do. Are 77 LTD 351 Windsor heads the same as GT40 heads? No, they're not. And the nice thing about going and getting the Explorer motor is really you could just get the whole motor. And then you could put springs on it and a camshaft in it, and then, you know, you've got Cobra motor. Bill just wanted his unrelated question of LT5s answered promptly. I dare you miss this question. And I like LT5s, and I'll tell him whatever I know. But again, it's not that particular Corvette was a little bit rare, obviously. I mean, unfortunately for GM, they kind of made it look too much like the rest of the Corvette, so nobody knew that you had spent lots and lots of money on your 400 horsepower version rather than the then 300 horsepower version. It needed to say, you know, big LT ZR1 or LT5 or whatever. You'd have a big Lamborghini wing or something so you could profile in it. Not just, I mean, it had a lot more performance, obviously, but it needed to have more than that. Have you done anything with a Toyota V6 that was built by Yamaha? No, the SHO Taurus, the Ford one that Yamaha helped on the development of. I remember being around the show shop when they were doing a bunch of that stuff. Yeah, the Ford Camry, it had a really, really long timing chain until they made it gear drive. Yeah, and unfortunately, it was never a production one. Everyone was coming up with like super cool stuff to try to to try to go fast. Would you put GT40 heads on a Carb 351 Windsor 70s motor? Yeah, I would. They're good production heads. I think guys would argue that they're the best small block Ford production head. BHP, Scott. Will a GT40 heads improve a wet exhaust 302 boat, or should I get the 351 Windsor? A 351 Windsor would be, if you're talking about the motor, would be a better upgrade for the 302 because you're going to get a lot more power in the range that you're probably going to be running most boat motors. And the heads themselves on the 302 are going to be most beneficial as you go up in RPM. So having the torque for the boat is a good idea. What compression ratio is optimal? There's not an optimal one for a ProCharger. A 10.5 to 1, like putting ProChargers on a factory anything, LS3, L99, LY6, pick any of the designations that you want, and the ProCharger will work fine. Ford always cost more because less people own them. Until the 5-liter came about, that's what changed Ford performance and made it more mainstream. In fact, it could be argued that then the introduction of a multi-billion-dollar industry with the 5-liter Ford, all of a sudden there's 20 or 30 different cylinder heads for them. So they were at least on par, and maybe you could argue that they even had more stuff available for them than the Chevy stuff did. Was the 69 Windsor 4-barrel head truly better casting or just a bigger valve? The head flows more than other Windsor castings, but I've never seen a direct comparison on that head versus the GT40 head. I think that the GT40 head is still better. Bill, you're on thin ice because nothing that you're saying is accurate. I've done testing on the LT5. The guys from West Tech have one, so I do know about them. But the problem here isn't my knowledge or lack of knowledge, because if I don't know about something, I say that all the time. The problem here is with your patience. So you need to adjust that. What compression would you not run regular fuel and go for premium? It's not specifically compression. It has to do with a lot of things. Some engines, some combinations, some chamber design, some piston designs, some temperature, some air intake temperatures, meaning if you have an open filter under the hood. There are a lot of things that can make the motor more or less detonation sensitive, and that's when I would put premium in it. Yeah, I think it could be argued that the 5-liter Mustang kind of, that was like in 82, especially, we were getting through the doldrums of the 70s when, performance was having a hard time keeping up with the ever more stringent emissions requirements. So we ushered in, I'd say in 82 or something, we kind of ushered in the advent of a whole new muscle car era, which has continued to this day. Have you tested a motorhome 454? Yeah, lots of them. And in full-size trucks too. In fact, when I go get a big block, it's usually from some full-size 1-ton or van or truck or van. And if it's a motorhome, I would take it from a motorhome too if we found it. Usually it's easier to pull out of the trucks though. So we're going to check our poll. 57% saying no, that the small block is not better than the Chevy. So it seems like we have more Chevy guys than Ford guys, but 57-43. So we will end our poll there. Yeah, the 5-liter was a small block of the 90s. And I guess you could kind of argue the late 80s as well. As a small block Chevy, ever won Le Mans or Baja. Did the Corvette? Well, Corvettes had class wins, but I don't think that they ever won overall, did they? (1980 to 81) 255 Fords were kind of special. That's right. I'd rather build a 2276 DW with thicker cylinder walls. I always run 87 in my truck, but I'm not. It's not performance oriented. It's all stock. Corvette C5R and the first gen LS. Yeah, they did. They were LSs by then, but I think guys would argue that that's still a small block Chevy. Yeah, the Crossfire didn't really do it for the Chevy guys, but when they introduced the TunePort stuff, I think really started, that we started having like real horsepower wars and pony car wars again. It was kind of cool. Nasty Fox, what's going on? How different are the Fox by 5.5.0s versus what came in the Thunderbirds and Cougars? Did they have them in the Cougars too? Was the Thunderbird 5-liter rated at the same power output as the HO Mustang was? When did Chevy have a small block head that flowed 270, 280 CFM? They didn't. They never have, not a production small block. Jason, I had a Fox body with 9 PSI Pro Charger and a current Coyote with 4 Performance Screw Charger. I prefer the latter, but yeah, Coyote with a twin screw on, probably a Whipple if it came from Ford Performance. That's going to be a lot more than a Fox body with a Pro Charger in it, unless you did a lot of stuff to that Fox motor, because the Coyote is already going to be naturally aspirated where a supercharged 5-liter would be. And then when you add boost to that, obviously it steps things up even more. Do you ever do any Yates-headed stuff? I've never built one, but I've been there when they've run those on the engine dyno. 5.4 mods, same thing as a 4.6. That's a 2-valve 5.4, so you can do ported head, ported stock heads, ported PI heads, or the TFS heads. There's lots of camshafts for those. The Lightning, the best thing that you could do is get rid of the little blower that they have on there and put a bigger one on there. Are there rules against the 351? Rules where? The GNX was the Grand National. I would say yes. The GNX not so much, because that was a rich person's car. There weren't a lot of GNXs out running around in the street. You found lots and lots of 5-liter Mustangs, lots and lots of TunePort Camaros and Firebirds and stuff. You know, GTAs, and then Grand Nationals also. But a GNX, I think I've only seen one or two of those actually on the road. The T-Bird Cougars, I'm thinking that they were 200 or 205 or something. I think he was talking about rules against the 351 Clevelands and certain racing bodies. Maybe there were. The 318 Mopar owns the 305 Chevy. But the thing is, was there anything, Oliver, when Chevy had like the old 69 305 carbureted version with a 5-speed and a Camaro, or the LB9, the TunePort one, did Dodge offer a 318 that would compete with that? I don't think that they did. GNX and Grand National are not the same thing. The GNX is a specialized version that made 300 horsepower or something as compared to 245. It's hard to make 400 horsepower on a stock bottom end 351 without breaking the bank on heads. You could do that if you did a little hand porting to a set of GT40 heads. There's a Grand National here in town on 20s or 18s. I don't think Mopar had anything in the late 80s and the early 90s to compete with a Camaro or a Fox Mustang. I don't think that they ever had one after they gave up on the Charger and Challenger and Barracuda stuff. They just didn't really have anything that they could have put a decent 318 in. They had the little red wagon, but that was not obviously a pony car. A 1970 GSX is a really cool car. Any stage 1 car would have been cool. Yeah, Kurt, the little red wagon was the fastest accelerating vehicle at the time, and that truck would put a hurting on like an SS 454. Did I put 351 Windsor heads on my 302? Yes, all of that interchanges. Pro Max 180 heads versus AFR and Porsche 185s. I don't know how that will go. I don't have either one of those. Ford 302. I'm not a Ford guy. I'm not a Chevy guy. I'm not a Mazda guy or anything. Oh, the Aspen RT. That's right. I forgot about that. They had 360 versions of those with 4-speeds in them. I remember a friend of ours had one. He was an older guy, and he let my friend drive it, and that thing was pretty sporty. The Dodge Little Red Wagon engine, I think it's an E58. I'd like to build a replica of that motor and see how that 360 compares to the 346 pack motor. I have my suspicions about about the 360 being better through most of the curve. Richard, do you like any 30s, 40s, 50s cars? I like the Tri-5 Chevy stuff. I kind of like the T-Birds, but not as much as I like a 55, 56, and 57 Chevys. The 30s and 40s stuff is neat, but I'm much more drawn to whatever they've done on the engine than I am the cars. I like lots of different cars. The Chevy Sprint Turbo, especially. And I like imports. I like domestic stuff. I like exotic stuff. All of it's good. How do you feel about 10-inch compression, low boost, street app prep with ring gap and proper cam versus a low 9 more compression build? Both Fords the same. I don't know. I think you're splitting hairs there. Yeah, Jason, I appreciate a nice any of those clean cars. The problem is that when I worked for All Chevy Magazine way back in the day, that walking around, we went to a bunch of like Tri Five or Chevy shows and meets and stuff, and you're walking around, you're like, oh, that one's awesome, that one's awesome. Look, that one has a complete tune fork. That has all the Corvette suspension. That is this, that is this. And after you see about 200 or 300 of them, you're like, okay. I'm good on the Chevys now. Because the thing is, there's so many nice ones, and guys do different things, and I appreciate all the hard work that they put into it. But like none of those, as nice as they were and as cool as they were, none of them make me want that. Like the other cars speak to me more than those do. Chrysler had the Cordova with Corinthian leather for Ricardo Montalban. I do want to take the he revs his lawnmower just like the rest of us. I do want to take the little whizzy governor thing is off the lawnmowers. Those things drive me nuts. When I want full throttle, I want full throttle. I don't want to ask for full throttle. I want to command full throttle. Can you update us on all upcoming? There's lots of engine stuff coming, and I'd rather just tell you about something that I did, not stuff I'm going to do. The 340 is the best thing that's ever happened ever. What is your favorite Ford? I don't have a favorite one. The favorite Ford that I've owned, I still owned, I think. Well, I don't know about that. I have an 88 5-liter LX that I'm the original owner of. So that Mustang, I'm hoping will always stay in the family. It's kind of cool. I had a Ford GT in 06, which is another awesome car that I wish I would have kept. There's lots of cool ones. A 65 or 66 Shelby would be really cool. Obviously, a Cobra, the Thunderbolts, or a Galaxy. Any of those. There's so many cool things that there's just no shortage of coolness. Turbo Monza, what's up? Tuning in from middle of nowhere. I'll be home for 2 weeks on Tuesday on 3800s heads and the 52.5 winter are my things to get done while I'm home. Man, you were just on the road. Kurt, so you think the X heads and the J head would be the same thing, right? Would flow 220 CFM at 500 lift? It seems like a lot. I kind of would like to see that. Yeah, Turbo Monza, we want to see what's going to happen with the bigger valves. If you can't do it, just send them back and I'll have somebody else put valves in them, whatever you need to do, man. I know you're busy. Always thought that Cleveland was a big block and the Windsor was a small block. The LX is a coupe. It's a notch. Cash, any chance you'd look at my dyno printout and tell me what you think? Because we're not using the other word. We don't use that other word anymore. Trust your experience. I don't know what I can tell you. If you have a specific question, definitely send it over. I've never run a 318 poly head. The guys at Westech have run one of the 318 poly motors. Yeah, Hollywood Nights and Graffiti, all those are good. The Cleveland for me, a 351 Cleveland is a small block for me. 2-lane blacktop, that's also good. I'm a big Steve McQueen fan, but honestly, I don't the car chasing bullet is not. I don't think it's nearly as good as the one that's in what's the one with Robert De Niro, where they're actually using cars that weren't actual hopping and stuff. Ronin, that's it. Thank you. One more minute. Gone in 60 Seconds, the original one, yeah. The other one with, and I'm a fan of Nick Nolte, or Nick Nolte, Nicolas Cage. But the original one I thought was better. To Live and Die in LA, Quadrigen Noises, whoa. And actually, I'm a big fan of all of the Cannonball Run, Gumball Rally. It's the ugliest car I've ever seen. All the original Smokey and the Bandit, because they were doing like really serious car stuff. I mean, they were hurting a lot of them. And Hooper was awesome with the rocket car stuff. Corvette Summer, yeah. Mark Hamill. Does a stock block 462 valve max higher horsepower than a stock block 302 Windsor? Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, Vanishing Point, we talked about that. Blues Brothers, and we're wearing sunglasses. Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, that's another good one. But the ending was just so tough. Calvin, you lost bottom end putting boss heads on your 70 Mach 1. Heart Like a Wheel, yeah. Sure. Shirley Muldowney. Cha-Cha. Yeah, Scott, I I didn't hold on to it for quite long enough. It's doubled or tripled in value now, I think. Would have been a good investment. One of my first good investments for cars. As much as I know about cars, I haven't been very successful in flipping them because that's not really what I like to do. Yeah, I don't like the I'm with Mike. The car stuff now is ridiculous because they CGI everything. And I understand it's hard for them to do car jumps and with the with the litigious society that we have and stuff, and they don't want to hurt the stars and stuntmen and all, and I understand that. But they're with drivers as good as they are with these, all the drifting talent and stuff, they could make really good car chases. But the problem is it's probably so expensive to close down streets and stuff to have it do really, really cool stuff. And I say, do it in one take. Whatever happens, happens. We want to see what really happens, but they've got to jump over stuff like in the second Gone in 60 Seconds with Nick Cage in it. When he did the jump, well, I think he was on the San Pedro Bridge. When he did the jump over the other stuff, they CGI'd it. That's a jump they could have made. Yeah, it would have damaged the car, and probably the people that are in control of the bridge said, "You want to do what?" put a steel plate down or whatever you're going to land on so you don't break the bridge. But make the jump. With what they know about jumping cars now, you could have constructed the the vehicle hauler, you know, the angle of attack on the vehicle hauler, so that the jump could have came up in Dukes of Hazzard landing. You know, they weight the trunk and stuff, and put like a trophy truck suspension in it for the last minute or whatever. They could have sailed that thing and landed and kept going. The thing that I like about in all these car movies is that you see the thing go off the jump and they show it just burying the nose and bending the front of the car in half and just taking out the whole car. And then in the next scene, it's like, whoa, and they're taking off and rolling away. You're like, oh yeah, that car didn't roll away like that. That one was bent in half. That frame was definitely bent. A turbo LS and that 88 knots. Yeah, that would be totally unique. Yeah, that car was the car in the original got in 60 seconds. That was Eleanor, right? The original Eleanor. Yeah, they went through a lot of them in Dukes of Hazzard. Oh yeah, I know they tacoed that Mustang really bad on the utility pole. Yeah, the light pole was not actually written into the scene. Yeah, Dukes of Hazzard it's a little simple, but it's cool. They're jumping cars. Because now think about it, with all the stuff that people have done, they could sail stuff now. You just make it a lot. You wouldn't do it with a 2-ton Dodge Challenger. Joey Chitwood, he was the stuff. He had his own stunt school. And who are the? Oh, Remy Julien was the other cool stunt guy. Christine was good. Okay, guys, I gotta get going. Oh, are you in attack mode? Are you ready? Do you need to go out? Okay, well, go get him. Okay, guys, thank you all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow. Ready? Attack! Attack, Maya! Attack! Go get him. Who's out there?